The office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the silence. Paul sat at his desk, fingers tapping impatiently on the keyboard as he tried to focus. But my eyes were fixed on Emily, his secretary, who was leaning over her desk, her blouse stretching across her curves. Her dark hair spilled over one shoulder, and I could see the faint outline of her bra through the fabric. She caught me staring, and a sly smile curved her lips. "Laurel," she said, her voice low but clear. "Do you think it's a good idea to be standing there like that? Paul might notice." I glanced at Paul, but he was too engrossed in his work to pay us any mind. "He looks busy," I replied, stepping closer to Emily's desk. "Besides, he wouldn't dare interrupt us." Emily chuckled softly, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "You're so confident. What makes you think he'd listen to us if he did?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I have a plan. A way to make him beg." Her eyebrows shot up, and her lips parted slightly. "Beg? What are you talking about?" I straightened, glancing again at Paul. He was still oblivious, his brows furrowed as he typed furiously. "Keep your voice down," I warned, then continued. "I saw something earlier. Something that could work to our advantage." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "What did you see?" "Paul let it slip," I explained, lowering my voice even more. "He mentioned how stressed he is, how he hasn't been able to relax lately. And I overheard him talking about a massage therapist he wanted to book, but he couldn't find the time." A slow grin spread across her face. "And you thought, what? That we could give him a massage ourselves?" "Not just a massage," I said, my tone growing more devious. "Something he'd never forget." Emily bit her lip, considering. "You really think we can pull this off?" "We don't have a choice," I replied, meeting her gaze. "If we play our cards right, he won't know what hit him." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's do it." I turned back to Paul, watching him for a moment. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. "Perfect." Taking a deep breath, I walked around the desk and stepped into his line of sight. "Paul," I said, my voice casual. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up, startled. Sure. What's up?" "You've been working non-stop," I said, trying to sound concerned. "You look exhausted. Maybe you should take a break." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I wish I could, Laurel. But there's so much to do." Before he could protest further, Emily chimed in from behind her desk. "Actually, Paul, Laurel has a point. You've been pushing yourself too hard. Maybe." She paused, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Maybe we could help you relax." Paul blinked, clearly confused. "Help me relax? How?" I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "How about a massage?" His eyes widened, and he stammered, "A massage? Here? Now?" Emily stood, smoothing her skirt as she approached. "Why not? It's just the three of us, and no one else is here. We could give you a quick session to help ease some of that tension." Paul looked between us, his expression torn between disbelief and curiosity. "You're serious?" I nodded, my voice soft but firm. "Absolutely. Trust us, Paul. We know what we're doing." He hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. But the office remained silent, the only sounds coming from the machines. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "All right. If you're sure." Emily and I exchanged a glance, both of us suppressing giddy smiles. "Perfect," I said, guiding him to stand. "Now follow me." I led him to the small conference room at the end of the hall, where a long table and chairs sat in neat rows. Emily followed close behind, her presence a constant source of warmth and excitement. Once inside, I closed the door quietly, ensuring we wouldn't be disturbed. "All right," I said, turning to Paul. "First things first. Take off your jacket and shirt." He blinked, clearly unsure. "Here? Now?" Emily stepped forward, her voice soothing. "Just trust us, Paul. We'll take care of everything." Reluctantly, he began undressing, revealing his broad shoulders and muscular back. My pulse quickened as I took in the sight of him, knowing what was about to happen. Emily positioned herself behind him, her hands hovering just above his shoulders. "Lean forward," she instructed, her voice calm but commanding. "Put your arms on the table." He hesitated, then complied, resting his weight on the table. Emily glanced at me, and I nodded, letting her take the lead. Slowly, she placed her hands on his shoulders, applying gentle pressure. Paul inhaled sharply, his muscles tensing under her touch. "Relax," she murmured, increasing the pressure as she worked her way down his back. "Let it go." I watched, my body tingling with anticipation. This was just the beginning, and already I could feel the energy building between us. Moving around to the other side of the table, I reached out, my fingers brushing against Paul's arm. "Your turn," I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let me help." As Emily continued her massage, I began working on his arms, my fingers tracing the lines of his muscles. Paul groaned softly, his resistance melting away beneath our combined touches. I could feel his body relaxing, his breathing evening out as we worked together to soothe him. But this was only the start. I had something far more daring in mind, something that would leave Paul utterly undone. And as I glanced at Emily, I could see the same mischievous glint in her eyes. We were in this together, and nothing could stop us now. I leaned closer to Paul, my lips brushing against his ear as I whispered, "You've been working too hard, boss. Let us take care of you." My fingers trailed down his arm, leaving a trail of warmth in their wake. Emily was behind him, her hands already kneading the tension from his shoulders, her touch firm yet tender. Paul groaned again, his head lolling forward as if he couldn't resist the pull of our ministrations. His breathing grew heavier, and I could see the faintest sheen of sweat on his brow. He was ours now, completely at our mercy, and the thought sent a shiver of excitement down my spine. "Emily," I said softly, catching her eye. She nodded, understanding without needing words. Together, we maneuvered Paul so that he was lying face up on the conference table, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The polished wood beneath him felt cool against his skin, contrasting sharply with the heat radiating from his body. I positioned myself beside him, my fingers tracing the curve of his jaw. "Relax," I murmured, my voice low and hypnotic. "Just let go." Emily moved to the other side of the table, her hands hovering over his chest. Slowly, she began to press into his torso, working out the knots of stress that had accumulated there. Paul's eyes fluttered closed, his mouth falling open as he let out a soft, almost helpless sound. "Do you trust us?" I asked, my tone teasing but serious. Paul's eyelids lifted just enough for him to meet my gaze. There was hesitation there, but also something else, curiosity maybe, or perhaps something darker. Whatever it was enough to make my heart race. He gave the faintest nod, and in that moment, I knew we had him. Emily and I exchanged another look, one filled with silent promises and unspoken desires. Without a word, we began to undress him, peeling away his shirt and pants until he lay bare before us. His skin was pale in the dim light of the room, his muscles taut with both arousal and exhaustion. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for him, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what we had planned, after all. What we wanted. And judging by the way Paul's breathing hitched as my fingers brushed against his skin, he wanted it too. Emily knelt beside him, her plump figure casting a shadow over his body. Her lips curved into a sly smile as she leaned in close, her breath warm against his skin. "You're going to enjoy this," she purred, her voice dripping with confidence. "Trust me." And then she took him into her mouth, her lips wrapping around him with an expertise that left no room for doubt. Paul's entire body stiffened, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he tried to hold back a moan. But it was no use. The sound escaped him, raw and unfiltered, and I couldn't help but smile. This is what he needed. I moved closer, my fingers trailing down his chest to his stomach. I could feel the tension coiling within him, the need building with every passing second. And when I finally wrapped my hand around him, matching Emily's pace, Paul's control shattered. "God!" he gasped, his voice breaking. What are you doing to me?" "Giving you what you didn't even know you wanted," I replied, my tone as smooth as honey. My thumb brushed against the underside of him, teasing and tormenting in equal measure. Paul bucked his hips, desperate for more, but we were in control now. And we weren't letting go. Emily pulled back, her lips wet and glistening, and smiled up at him. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she asked, her voice playful. "But we're not done yet." She stood, her movements deliberate as she slowly stripped off her own clothes. When she was fully exposed, she climbed onto the table, positioning herself above Paul. Her weight pressed down on him, and he groaned again, his hands instinctively reaching for her. "Take your time," I instructed, my voice steady despite the storm raging within me. Let him get used to you. Emily obeyed, her thighs tightening around him as she lowered herself inch by inch. Paul's eyes widened, his breath hitching as he felt her envelop him. And then with one final deliberate movement, she took him all in. Oh God. Paul muttered, his voice barely audible. His hands gripped her hips, steadying her as she began to move, slowly at first but growing faster with each passing moment. The sounds of their bodies coming together filled the room, primal and unrelenting. I watched, transfixed, as Emily rode him with a kind of precision that left no doubt about her experience. And when she finally leaned down to kiss him, her breasts brushing against his chest, I knew it was my turn. I stepped closer, my hands moving to cup her face. Let me help, I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her breathing heavy as she relinquished some of her control. Together we kissed him, our lips meeting over his chest as we worked in unison. Paul's hands moved between us, searching for purchase, but there was none to be found. We were everywhere, surrounding him, consuming him entirely. And then, as if on cue, Emily reached down and took him into her mouth once more, her lips working in perfect harmony with my own movements. Paul cried out, his voice breaking as he surrendered to the pleasure we were inflicting upon him. Please. He begged, his voice trembling. I don't think I can. Yes, you can, I insisted, my lips brushing against his ear. You're stronger than you think, Paul. Just let go. And with that, Emily increased her pace, her lips sliding up and down with an urgency that left no room for doubt. Paul's body tensed, his hands gripping the edge of the table as his orgasm approached. Fuck. He growled, his voice strained. I'm. Come for us, Emily demanded, her voice commanding. Show us how much we've changed you. And then it happened. Paul's body shuddered, his release pouring forth as he cried out our names. His hands tightened around Emily's hips, holding her still as he emptied himself into her. We stayed like that for a moment, basking in the aftermath of his surrender. Paul's chest heaved, his eyes glazed over as he struggled to catch his breath. And when he finally spoke, his voice was shaky but full of reverence. What did you do to me? Emily smirked, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. We gave you something you needed, she said. Something you didn't even know you wanted. I leaned in close, my lips brushing against his ear. And if you're lucky, I whispered, we might just do it again. The conference room was quiet now, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft rustle of clothing as we moved. Paul lay back on the table, his chest still rising and falling with heavy breaths, his face a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Emily and I stood beside him, our hands lingering on his skin, savoring the warmth of his body and the way his muscles twitched beneath our touch. What did you do to me? Paul repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. His eyes flicked between Emily and me, searching for answers in our smiles. Emily leaned down, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders, brushing against his bare chest. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lips soft and warm. We gave you something you needed, she said, her tone teasing but tender. Something you didn't even know you wanted. I watched as Paul's eyes closed for a moment, his lashes fanning out against his cheeks. He looked so vulnerable, so unlike the stern, tightly wound boss I was used to. It was intoxicating, being the ones to unravel him like this. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, and something more. Possession, maybe. He was ours, at least for this moment. And if you're lucky, I thought, we might just do it again. But before I could say anything, Emily straightened up, her smirk returning. Besides, she added, her voice light and playful, it's not every day you get to see your boss begging for more. Paul let out a soft laugh, though there was a hint of embarrassment in it. Begging, huh? He murmured, his gaze drifting to me. Was I really that obvious? I shrugged, trying to keep my expression neutral, though amusement danced in my chest. A little, I admitted. But hey, no judgment here. You were pretty damn amazing. His cheeks flushed at that, a faint pink tint rising to the surface. It was such a human reaction, so far removed from the stoic mask he usually wore. I found myself wanting to see more of it, to strip away the layers of stress and responsibility until there was nothing left but this, him, raw and unguarded. Emily seemed to have the same idea. She stepped around the table, her hips swaying as she approached me. Her fingers brushed against mine, sending a shiver down my spine. Well, since he enjoyed himself so much, she said, her voice dropping to a low, sultry murmur, why don't we give him another reason to beg? My heart skipped a beat. The thrill of the suggestion was almost too much to handle. I glanced at Paul, who was watching us with wide eyes, clearly unsure whether to protest or encourage her. Before he could decide, Emily laced her fingers through mine and pulled me closer to the table. How about this, she said, her voice dripping with mischief. We show him something he's never imagined before. Something that will leave him completely at our mercy. Paul's breath hitched, his throat swallowing nervously as he processed her words. What exactly are you two planning? He asked, his voice strained with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Emily laughed softly, leaning down to brush her lips against his ear. Oh, don't worry, she whispered, her breath hot against his skin. You'll enjoy it. I promise. Before he could respond, she pulled away and met my gaze, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Help me out here, she said, her tone urgent. Let's give him a taste of what we can do together. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding, my pulse quickening with anticipation. Emily always knew how to push boundaries, how to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And right now, I was more than willing to follow her lead. All right, I said, stepping closer to Paul. Let's see how much he can take. Without waiting for a response, I reached for the waistband of his pants, easing them down his hips with deliberate slowness. His breath caught in his throat, his hands fisting the edge of the table as he tried to maintain some semblance of control. But there was no hiding the way his body tensed or the way his eyes darkened with desire as I exposed him to the cool air of the room. Emily stepped in then, her movements confident and fluid. She knelt beside him, her fingers trailing lightly across his inner thighs. Relax, she murmured, her tone soothing yet commanding. Just let go. We've got you. Her words seemed to break whatever resistance he had left. His shoulders relaxed, his hands unclenching from the table. He exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with each breath. And when Emily's mouth descended on him, his entire body shuddered, a quiet groan escaping his lips. I watched the scene unfold, my own arousal building as I took in the sight of Emily lavishing attention on him. Her lips were skilled, her tongue darting and swirling with practiced precision. Paul's head fell back, his eyes squeezing shut as he surrendered entirely to the sensations. Fuck, he groaned, his voice ragged. Emily. She responded by tightening her grip, her lips moving faster, her breath hitching as she lost herself in the rhythm. I could see the way his hips bucked subtly, seeking more, needing more. And when his hands came up to tangle in her hair, I knew he was close. But Emily wasn't done yet. With one last flick of her tongue, she pulled away, leaving him gasping and trembling. Not yet, she said, her voice husky with satisfaction. We're not done with you. She rose to her feet, her eyes gleaming with mischief as she turned to me. Your turn, she said, her tone challenging. Let's see what you've got. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my nerves tingling with excitement as I stepped forward. This was new territory for me, diving into something so bold and uncharted. But with Emily by my side, I felt invincible, ready to explore every inch of Paul's pleasure. All right, I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. Let's give him something to remember. As I knelt beside him, I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the pulsing tension that begged to be released. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for him, my touch hesitant at first but growing bolder with each passing second. Look at me, I commanded, my voice firm yet gentle. Don't look away. Paul's gaze snapped to mine, his eyes wide and filled with a mixture of awe and desperation. And as my lips closed around him, his hands tightened in my hair, his breath catching in his throat.